This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Excuse us if we're a little rough around the edges. We had a little bit of a tech difficulty, rocky kind of tech test a few minutes ago. So we're all getting our bearings again, but we're going to have some fun tonight. And we are going to explore the Derwent paint pans. I've got a few little projects to play with here. So grab whatever supplies you have handy and paint along and play along. And hopefully you'll get some ideas on how to use the products you already have. Maybe if you've been curious about some of these Derwent products in particular, you'll get some ideas on how you can use those. And we're just going to have some fun and paint together for the next hour or so. If you have any questions, when we're going along here, you can type question in the chat. I recommend typing the word question in all caps and then just typing what your question is. And Gianna will relay those questions to me while I'm working. So she'll say them right out loud. And we're just going to go ahead and get started. So let me switch my camera so you can see my desk. And there we go. Hopefully, there we go. And what I have here is a variety of the Derwent pan paint products. I don't have the tinted charcoal because I just don't think that's something I would use that often. But if you have that, that would apply to what we're going to do today. I've got some leaves. I just grabbed these from my front yard and all the leaves are changing. So that's kind of fun. And I thought they could be kind of inspirational for us. I grabbed some, and you can use any paper you have, but I did grab some watercolor greeting cards because I think some of the things we make today may be really sweet greeting cards. And I also have some black watercolor paper in case we want to explore that. Because something that's neat about the Derwent pan paints is that many of them will show up on black paper. So let's take a look at, well, I'm going to start off with my favorite Derwent pan paint, and that would be the Derwent Inktense pan paint. Now, I don't worry about my my palette getting stained, but if it does bother you, you can use a magic eraser to clean up the stains, but mine just gets too much use for me to bother with that. I recommend when you get any sort of pan paint that you make a swatch on watercolor paper. That way you're going to have a much better idea of what these are going to look like. As you can see, some of these colors are really dark in the pans, and it can be hard to tell, is that a purple? Is that a gray? Is that a black? Is that a blue? When you have a swatch, it's much easier for you to tell. Now you can rearrange these the way you want them as well. So if you don't like the arrangement that comes, the way they come, you can switch them all around until it's perfect for how you like to paint. You can also make mini palettes because they come in these little cartridges of 6. You could make a mini palette of 6 colors to take on the go with you if you didn't want to bring a whole palette. The 24 set I have here has all of the pan paints that are offered by Derwent in the Inktense range. They also come in 2 sets of 12 if that's more convenient, or if you just want one, you know, if you just like the colors in 1 set of 12, that's totally fine. Now, I get a lot of questions on how these differ from the Inktense blocks, and quite frankly, they're very similar. There are some colors that are available in the pan paints that aren't available in the blocks. So if you want to have every color, then if you picked up the pan paints, I think it's something like maybe 7 unique colors that are in the pan paints that aren't in the blocks. But I will tell you, if you have the blocks, you can use a paintbrush, you can pick up the color from the blocks, and they're going to be extremely similar. In fact, the formulation seems almost identical. Whereas I find the pencils, the Inktense pencils, to be more transparent. These actually have a little bit more opacity to them. If you look at my swatch here, I have a black line drawn, and you can see a lot of these colors have quite a bit of opacity. Like this red here has a lot of opacity. That's cherry. This is a red oxide, has some opacity. The mid ultramarine, the yellow ochre, the white is very opaque. It's almost like a gouache. So you have just a little bit more body to these colors. I'm going to do an overview over all the pan paint sets I have, and then we're going to start doing some projects. Now, one thing I will recommend is before you're ready to paint that you give your paints a good soak, because the Derwent pan paints are very thirsty, and they can cut. You can get quite a strong opaque effect if you pre-soak them. If you want a more translucent effect, I wouldn't pre-soak them, except for the white. The white definitely could use a drop of water just to really make sure they're going to be nice and strong and opaque. And we'll be using the Derwent pan paints in the the next class we do with Michael's, and I will have a better video. I'm noticing we are having some tech issues, and it's a little bit pixelated today, but we'll have that all cleared up by the Premium Crow class that we're doing later this month. But that background was done in the Derwent Inktense pan paints. The next one we're going to have a look at is the Derwent Pastel Set. The pastel shades feel very much like the Inktense. Now, the big difference between the Pastel Set and the Inktense pan paints, aside from the color palette, which is much more muted, is that these are not permanent. You can lift these up. So, but they feel very similar. They have that same kind of thirsty effect. They're, I would say, semi-opaque, like that kind of gray-green is very opaque. That kind of darker gray is very opaque. So that's artichoke. That's storm gray. The sky blue, silver blue, I'm sorry, is quite opaque. And the cornflower blue is quite opaque. But there is a certain sheerness to it. So if you did want to get more watercolor effects with these, they definitely will do that. You'd almost assume them to be super duper opaque because they're pastel, but that they actually do have a sheerness to them, which is really quite lovely. And let's see, the next one we have are the Derwent Metallics. Now with these, I recommend you swatch them on white and black. And the reason for that is that these paints have, some are opaque and some colors are sheer. So I like to use these sheer colors, and you can see they're sheer because you can see the black line and they just kind of show up as glitter on black. I like to use these sheer colors, and I would say this, I think this is Sunset and Pale Gold, and let's see, this one, I think it's, I might got mine switched around. I think this one is gold, and then this, I think it might be called lime gold, this greenish gold. These colors are sheer, so they're really pretty to put over moth wings, butterflies, fairy wings, anytime where you want some glimmer, but you don't want to cover up what you have underneath. And then when you want an opaque effect, going with like the silvers and the purples and the pinks and the blue, they have more body to them and they're going to be much more opaque. And these you definitely want to spray before you use them so that they can be good and activated and ready to go. And we'll use those in the Crow project as well. And last but not least is the Derwent Graphitint. Granulating watercolors have been very popular these last few years, and these will give you that effect at a much lower price point than a lot of the popular granulating watercolors. They have a really earthy tone to them. They contain graphite, so they can actually smudge a little bit after your painting's done. So I'm going to show you what I do when I have a painting in my sketchbook. This was done with the Graphitint pan paints, and what I do is I just tape a piece of deli paper in my sketchbook so that I don't smear it. But you can get some beautiful granulating textures. It's great for painting things like a weathered rust buildings that you want to have a little bit of grunginess to, metal, stormy skies, that sort of thing. I have a couple of landscapes in here too with them. Let me just find them real quick. Right here, you can just get a lot of real nice texture there. So that's what those are really excellent for. And now we're going to have some fun and do some techniques, and these techniques will apply to any of these products and also any watercolors that you already have. And I'm going to start off by just giving myself a watercolor greeting card, because it's fun to do these experiments on watercolor greeting cards because they're small and there's not a lot of pressure. And you can have a lot of fun with them. So the first one is actually going to be a really fun and easy technique. And what you want to do is grab a leaf and find one that's got like a good amount of texture to it, meaning like it's got some raised lines. And I like to use the back side of the leaf because you're going to get more lines. And what you're going to do is you are going to use a flat paintbrush or a flat or a filbert. And you're going to pick up some colors and you're going to paint directly on the leaf. And I'm going to use nice fall colors. So I'm going to start off with some of the Inktense, because those have all really great fall colors. And then we'll add some metallics to it as well. So this is going to be a printmaking technique, and we're simply going to paint color on this. And so I don't make a mess of my table, I'm going to grab a little piece of a little piece of kind of sticker release paper there so I don't make a big mess. I'm going to start with my lightest color that I want to use, which is going to be this mango yellow, and I'm just going to paint it in some areas here. And then I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to grab some, I think I'll do some cherry red, and look at how opaque that is. I'm not covering up the yellow. I'm just kind of going next to it, around it. I'm going to get the stem too with this. I'm going to try to anyway. And I am going to go with some green. I think I want to do this really light kiwi green. And I might add a little bit of a darker green to it. Now, if the green mixes with the red, we'll actually get a little bit of brown, and that will look really natural in this type of setting. And I'm going to put a little bit on top of the yellow.
Lindsay, as
now
long
you
as
might,
you're doing this right now, we got a question.
Yeah.
Do you use graphite on greeting cards without it smudging?
I would give it a little spray of fixative, or maybe just a little spray of hairspray. So the first time we stamp this onto a card, we're just going to lay it down. Have a paper towel or a, oops, I just got a fingerprint on there. I have a paper towel or a scrap piece of paper handy and just rub over the back. And hopefully it's not smearing out too much. And there we have a cute, just sweet little leaf print. Now, if you want to get another print, what you can do is spray the leaf with water. And I'm just going to set my card aside while I do that. So I'm using this fine mist spray, but I'm just going to spray it off camera so I don't spray my table. And then I can put it on again and get 2 leaves. Or you can mix and match your leaves. I'm not covering them with the paper towel because I'm afraid I'm going to smear the other one if I do. I'm going to peek under there. Well, I will press it down a little bit because I'm not getting enough transfer. But this is really fun. This is something that you could do with your kids, your grandkids. Now, you'll have less color the second print because there's less paint on there. So what you can do at that point is to take a brush, just any watercolor brush, a little bit of water, and you can just add some water within the outline that your print made. And don't worry about any smudges. I'm going to show you how we're going to disguise those in a minute. This is going to give you such a pretty, really simple effect. You could use this for Thanksgiving cards. You could use this for any just fall themed occasion, or you could even do it with other colors for other seasons. So I'm just very gently adding a little bit of water. And you can spread that out because until the Inktense dries, it's like watercolor. Once it dries, then you're not going to be able to lift it up. That makes this really nice to do on like postcards because you can send it through the mail without worrying anything's going to happen to it. I could let this dry completely and then go over it with the metallic paints and not worry about lifting up. See, as it's starting to dry, it doesn't want to lift up quite as much as I'm moving some of this paint around. Now I want to give it just a little bit of gold sparkle. So I'm going to look at my swatch here and say what color would look really nice. If I add that color, that kind of sunsetty color, if I add that gold, either of those is going to show up more of just a sparkle than a color. So that, I think I want to do that because that's going to just enhance it without making it too covered up. On the white paper, you will see a little bit of a peachy hue from the sunset color. just want to add it in a few places. I could even do a little of that green. I think it's the lime. And add that a few places. And then because I got some splashes, I got a fingerprint on there. I want to do something to disguise that. So what I'm going to do is actually spatter on some of the color. And I think I'll do a more opaque gold. So I'm going to go to this gold here, which is really lovely and opaque. Make a little puddle of it. And then just tap my brush and just add some spatter. And that is a really easy card that you can make. You don't need to know how to paint. You don't need to know how to draw. And you can just have fun with that. Now, I do want to do a little bit of splashes with the red and the green because of that red fingerprint. So I'm just going to go over to my cherry red. Make myself a puddle. You might have to kind of experiment with how wet you need your paint to be in order to spatter it. But basically, I just want to add a little bit of design element and disguise the fact that I had a fingerprint, because, you know, that happens to everyone. A little bit of green as well. You could do this technique with evergreen. You can get some like cedar boughs or some spruce or any sort of foliage you find around your home, and you can do the same thing. And just fill in with your brush. If you've got a skipped area that you don't like, you just fill in. So there is one card made. I think that would be really pretty to send. And as it dries, it's going to look a little bit more sophisticated. Right now, it's still wet and juicy, so it's just, you know, it'll get a little bit nicer as it dries. And we can do that same technique on black. Now, this is a rough paper, so it may skip a little bit more. I'm going to go back and use that exact same leaf, but this time I'm going to add just metallics to it. Maybe a little bit of the lighter color Inktense because I want it to show up really well. So I want to choose colors that are opaque this time. So I'm going to go in with this gold. Use that first. Actually, I'll put a bunch of that down. And ooh, that red is really opaque. And because I pre-activated that, I can pick up a lot of pigment here, and that's really what I want. And then to boost my color, I'm going to go and get some of the Inktense because that's just really, really bright and gorgeous. I'm going to go in with a little bit of that red again. I love getting that on the veins. And let's see. I want something that's going to show up. I think let's do some yellow ochre. And you could do this with gouache if you don't have the Inktense or any metallic paints that you have. You could do this with acrylic paint even. It doesn't have to be watercolors. Just kind of give you some ideas on what you might do with the stuff you already have. Now I'm just going to put one in here. I think this would be really pretty. Any sort of fall themed occasion, homecoming, anything like that. I'm going to be really careful because I'm going to try not to get any splashes. And I'm just very gently on a clean spot on my paper towel, just kind of press it down. And then you can simply drag some of your color around like we did before. I think I'll add a little bit of outlining here. And you could do this with the Inktense on fabric even and make yourself some beautiful custom pieces of fabric to quilt with. I would use a woven fabric such as muslin or broadcloth or any woven like quilter's cotton that's like a light color or a solid color, but your Inktense pan paints will be permanent on fabric, just like your Inktense blocks and your Inktense pencils. So, and as that dries, it will be a little bit more opaque. So I think this printmaking technique is just so wonderful for crafting because, you know, you can use it on fabric, you can use it on greeting cards, you can use it on scrapbook pages. The kids can do it. It's just a really, it's a really great entryway to be like, okay, how am I going to use this product? Here's some ideas. And you can do the printmaking project with any of your paints. Just if you need it to be permanent on fabric, the Inktense is really handy for that.
Lindsay, we're getting a few questions from people in different locations, and they were asking, would this have the same effect if they used artificial leaves?
It should actually, because usually use the back side of the artificial leaf where they have the plastic veining, and that will give you more texture, but it should, and those you could actually rinse off and keep reusing. So as long as it's got that good like veining pattern on the back, it should be absolutely fine. That's actually a great idea for school teachers if you're, you know, you want to do this in the middle of the winter and you don't have leaves that you can go for. Now we're going to build on that idea, and this time we are going to trace our leaves and use that as a template. And again, watercolor paper is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use a greeting card because I can actually use these as greeting cards. It's kind of handy. And well, maybe I'll do, I want to do that one. Oh, I like the oak leaf because that's a really fun shape. And you just want to lay that on your card, kind of try to center it up so it looks nice. And then we're just going to trace it. And you can either use an Inktense pencil for this, or you can use a regular pencil. It doesn't much matter because all we need to do is get the shape. I think I will use just a regular pencil for this. And I got a million pencils here, and you would think that I would have exactly the one that I need. I'm actually going to walk over here and get an Inktense pencil. Oh, let's see. All right, grabbing a watercolor pencil because that's what I have right here. It's been a rough around the edges type of day, guys. Okay. This is a Derwent watercolor pencil. These are not permanent when dry, but it's handy and I have it right here. So simply just trace around it and try to get any little subtle details that you see, any of those little bumps. An oak leaf is really fun. For one thing, they're a little thicker than other leaves, so they're easier to hang on to. So we are just going to get all those little details. Now this is fun because after we've traced the outline of the leaf, we can go in and draw the veins. And you can actually have that leaf right there and look at it, practice your observation, practice your drawing skills. It's wonderful, especially for younger children or beginner drawers, because you've got that bit of a guide where you've got something to trace, but then you're going to have to observe and look at the veins and see how they really go. I think a lot of the times we look at stuff, but we don't really pay that much attention. This is going to make us pay attention. And look, this leaf has a hole in it, so I'm gonna put those holes in there. I think that looks cool. It's the imperfections that make things look real and make things interesting. The tricky thing is just holding it still as you do it. I have a tutorial on my channel called Inktense Fall Leaves. It's from a few years ago, but we do some leaf projects with the Inktense. All right, oh, my leaf was a little dirty. I got a little grime on there, but I'm just going to wipe that off. So there we have our outline. And now I can look at my leaf. Sometimes it's easier to flip it over and look at the back side. So if that's easier for you, go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to sketch a line down the middle for that center vein. And then you'll notice that you've got lines that go, I like that other little kind of spot there, lines that go from the tips to the center. So if you get that center line and then you put these other lines in from each of the tips, that is going to really help you place everything. And you're going to notice they almost meet up, that the little veins there almost meet. They're a little bit offset, but they're pretty close. So that can help you get kind of figure out where they're supposed to come back into the leaf. So like this one, it would almost match that one. And then you have these kind of like smaller ones that don't really go so far. I'm just going to put these in quickly because we're not going to see them too much because they'll dissolve because it's watercolor, not a regular pencil. All right, so now what I want to do is wet the leaf except for the little holes in there. And I'm just going to use clear water for that. And we're going to do a wet in wet technique. And you want your paper wet enough, like where you're only wetting where you want the color to go. So we're only wetting the inside of the leaf. And you want it to be shiny. So if you tip it to the light, you want to see like that whole leaf, except for like the holes in the leaf if you decided to draw them. You want to see that shiny. And because I used a watercolor pencil, I've got some very faint green on there. But if you used a regular pencil, obviously it wouldn't have any color at all. And all of these paint pan products should be available at michaels.com. And I think the Metallics and the Inktense are available in store. At least my local store had them. All right, so we're going to do the shine test. Take a look there, see where we've missed. There's always a spot that gets missed, so go in there and add the water. And I know these are pretty relaxing, easy techniques. But sometimes it's fun just to have those easy techniques. Now, while this is wet, our paint's going to flow. And generally, your oak leaves are going to have golden, brown, and green tones to them. But if you want to make them different colors, you go right ahead. I'm going to start with some yellow ochre. See, if I drop that in there, it's going to flow. These are an ink-based product, so they do have a beautiful flow to them. Now, this technique wouldn't work so well on fabric because the fabric is so absorbing, so you wouldn't get as much flow there. But you could do a similar technique on fabric. It just would look a little bit different. So this I'm going to recommend mainly for paper. And this is your wet in wet technique. Now, oak leaves aren't the most spectacular looking leaves color-wise, but I think if you vary your color a little bit and you like, I'm going to use some Graphitint because not only do I get pretty color, but I get really nice texture too. I'm going to add this, it's called Meadow. It's a beautiful green color. I'm going to add some of that in there because even though the color is muted, it's going to give us some really pretty textures as it dries. You can kind of see it already. Hopefully you can see it. I apologize for my video quality. I'm not exactly sure what went on. Zoom updated something and it doesn't seem to be working quite so well. I downloaded their update and it's a little problematic. So I do appreciate you bearing with me and sticking around anyway. I just love that texture. I think it's so pretty. And I'm also going to add, because there isn't a real strong warm yellow in the Graphitint range, both pencils or pan paints. There's 24 pencils available. There's only 12 pan paints, but none of them are a really bright yellow. So that's why I grabbed the yellow ochre from the Inktense range. But I'm going to take a little bit of, let me see what, it's kind of like a, yeah, russet. It's kind of like a brownish, warm brown color. We'll add a little bit of that. If you want to really get that granulating look, which is that kind of texture I was pointing out, what you want to do is really make sure your paper is wet where you want the paint to go, and then let it dry on its own. You don't want to dry it with a hair dryer because that's gonna cut down on the effect. I also think, actually, I think that port color might be really nice with that. I think I mixed my colors up. Oh, you know what? I did. I'd mix my colors up. I'm going to go with a little bit of that port color, and I think a little bit of the russet. So that's port. It's kind of like a reddish color. Is that russet? That looks really red. Oh, it's pretty though. There's russet. Oh, I like that color though. What's that one called? Autumn brown. So that's russet. That's autumn brown. That's port. Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to go with the autumn brown. That's such a really gorgeous reddish brown. I think it's neutral enough that I can add it to this and it'll be good. So it'll be a little bit more colorful than a typical oak leaf, but I'm okay with that. Now be careful with red and, well, actually, it might look more like an oak leaf if you do this, but red and green are opposites. So if you let them mix up too much, you're going to make mud. But having some brown in your oak leaf is going to look pretty natural, so I really wouldn't worry about it. I just think that's such a pretty effect. I'll post the pictures of these projects on my blog in a day or two so you can see how they looked with a little bit better dimension.
Lindsay, we have a question regarding your mention of the blow, like a hair dryer. Does watercolor paints get affected by drying them with a heater or a hair dryer?
It doesn't hurt anything. The reason why I recommend not using a hair dryer or a heat tool for certain effects is because anytime you're trying to get like a texture effect, whether you're using salt, like to get a salt like a texture, or you're using a color that you want to granulate, such as super granulating watercolors or these Graphitint, if you want to get that granulating effect, you want it to dry slow, because that gives you time, that gives the paint time for the particles to settle out of the wash and become kind of separated. If you dry it too quickly, the wash mixture stays mixed up and it dries with an even effect. So if you don't like the texture, if you use a hair dryer or a heat tool and dry it quickly, then it's going to stay mixed up and it's going to be flat. But if you like the texture like I have going on here, if you let it dry naturally, that gives just time for those pigment particles to settle and to separate and to dry with that texture. So that's why I recommend that. Now at this point, if you have a watercolor or Inktense pencil, you could redraw those veins in there and they'd be really dark. Or you can use one of my favorite homemade tools, which is an old cut up credit card or old cut up gift card. And you can actually scrape those designs back, those details back in. And that's completely up to you. I think this looks really pretty as is, but I'm going to show you that technique because I also think that's a really handy technique to use. And the reason this works is because what you're doing when you scrape into your paper is you are damaging the surface, and that leaves a kind of abraded area for the paint to settle into. So you've opened up the pores of the paper, you've disrupted the sizing, and then all of that nice rich pigment can seep in there. And this is the credit card scraper tool I'm always talking about. If you've ever watched my YouTube channel, and I'll say get your credit card scraper, that's all this is. It's just like an old cut up credit card or gift card, and it is the most fabulous free watercolor tool. And it's just indispensable. And really, for a few minutes and some simple supplies, you can have a really pretty card. This would make a gorgeous set of cards to give as a gift. And I think it looks really sophisticated. And it's just like it just takes a little bit more time than doing our little leaf print cards. You could add a sentiment if you had some rubber stamps or you had really good handwriting. And I just think that's a really pretty effect. I'm actually going to switch to my front camera because I think that camera was showing up better. And I'm going to hold this to the screen so you can see it. Let me do that. Hopefully that shows up a little bit better. It just has a nice texture, a nice shape, and it takes a little bit of the fear out of doing the drawing because you have that work done for you already. So now I'll go back to the regular camera. Did we have any other questions?
Yes, we just got one. We got two actually now. Can you explain granulation and what you meant by that when you were explaining it?
Sure. I can, yeah, granulation has, I'll bring up my, actually, I'm going to switch back to my other camera because I think you can probably see this a little bit better. I did have some larger swatches of this, but if you look at this swatch card, I'm just going to tip it so it doesn't reflect. Can you see that texture? That paint has a certain amount of texture and, it's not a smooth, flat wash. That is an example of granulation. It's usually kind of a, almost like a grittiness that you see in the paint film. And it happens when you have paint particles that are heavy. And so you've got this big puddle of water and it's almost like you've had a bunch of sand and water and you stir it up and you can see that sand going in. And then if you let the water evaporate, you'd have little bits of sand here and there. It wouldn't dry in a solid, flat, even coating of sand. It's because those particles would be heavy and they would settle out. And that's the same thing you have with granulating paints. The heavier pigment particles, like graphite, minerals, things like that, they're going to not seep into the surface of the paper like your Inktense. That actually seeps into your paper and stains it. That's why it's permanent. After it dries, it seeps in, it stains it, and you can't scrub it back out. Those staining colors are tiny pigment particles, and they soak in and bond to the paper. Whereas sedimentary pigments, and which are minerals and things that don't absorb into your paper, they just kind of float in the water and settle out. And that's where you get that texture. You can avoid the texture by painting on dry paper and just using wet paint and drying it with a hairdryer. That would give you a flat wash if you preferred that. But if you have a really wet paper and you let it dry naturally, then you're going to get that texture. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I've explained that well. If there's any other questions, please don't hesitate to ask. This is a pretty informal, casual class tonight. So just go ahead and ask away. I hope I explained
that. You have a minute for one more. It kind of goes off of that. If you want the leaf to look glossy later, what is the best product that you would use to layer on top of that?
You could use, if you want it really glossy, I would recommend Glossy Accents, and it comes in a little bottle with like a needle tip applicator, and you would like trace the outline of your leaf, and you'd like take the little applicator and you go around the edge, and you would create a trough kind of, and then you would just fill it in, and then you let it completely dry, and then it would be super glossy. You could also use resin, if you want to do that. Resin would dry quicker. You could use UV resin even and dry it immediately, but it's up to you. Another, I think Glossy Accents would be the easiest, and then you don't have to worry about curing it and everything. But yeah, that would work. That would work out just fine. Okay, something fun that I really like to do is use these pastel paints. I'm going to show you an example that I did with these. And the nice thing about these is they're going to work really well with other products you already have. So you can use these with your Inktense. You can use these with any watercolors you have. And you may think pastels, that's pretty limiting, but I sketched these crayons with those pastel watercolors mixed with some regular watercolors and was able to get a really nice range of color. I'll actually put that up on the front camera because I think the front camera is working a little bit better. So when you get a palette, a specialty palette, instead of thinking, okay, I've got this specialty palette, how am I going to use it? And I would consider a specialty palette like the metallics or the pastels. They're beautiful, but they're more of accents than their own thing. So when you get a palette like metallics or pastels, instead of thinking, what am I going to make with this palette? Think of how will this product enhance the other products that I already have. Metallics are great accents. They're fun for holiday projects. But on their own, they're really limited because it's kind of like having a spice cabinet, and your cabinet's full of every spice imaginable, but you can't cook dinner just with the spices. You actually have to have some basic ingredients. And your regular watercolors, your Derwent pan paints, those are your regular ingredients. And then you add the spice to them to make them a little more interesting. And that's like what the pastel and the metallic pan paints are all about. So I'm going to kind of show you how you could use those to do some interesting things. We're going to start off with another paper here. I think the crayon motif is kind of fun. So let's draw a couple crayons. We can just do that with a pencil or a pen. Actually, I'm going to use a pen so you can see it really well. I'm just going to use a waterproof pen. And I'm just going to freehand a couple of crayons. We'll try to do kind of like that old-fashioned Crayola looking crayon. That'll be really fun. I'll just do make like a circle in the center or a ellipse in the center. We'll make one going this way. This could be a fun birthday card for somebody, or back to school card or anything like that. And I'm going to show you how to do some nice smooth blending with these products. Now, if you don't have the pastel paints, you could take any of your Derwent Inktense and add the white to them. And all of these colors are available open stock, I believe. So that's nice. If you buy a palette and you decide that you just really love one color and you keep using it up, you can get a replacement. Antique white is one of those colors that I have a replacement for because I've got a big pit in mine. And it's nice to have that color because it's unlike putting gouache in a pan and putting it in my travel kit. If I want to have white on the go, it doesn't crack, it doesn't fall out. It just works really well. So I've just put 3 crayons down. You could do more. And for these paints, I really like to use a firmer brush, so like a golden Taklon or something that's got a little body to it. I don't like to use like my really soft watercolor brushes because the pan paints are thirsty and they take a little bit more scrubbing. And also a lot of times I don't want to add a lot more water into them. So I will just grab like a filbert or a flat synthetic brush. So what I'm going to do is start off with my pastel color. So if I want to do a red crayon, but I want it kind of muted, I don't want to have a highlight, I'm going to start off with my lighter color and I'm going to work on dry paper. And I'm going to go ahead and add that. I'm going to make my light source on the top and I'm just going to go down like that. You can see your lines are still there. And then I'm going to use a brighter red and I'm just going to do a stripe right below it and I'm going to blend them together. And these almost just want to blend on their own really easily. I'm just going to clean my brush off. I'm going to blot off the extra water on my paper towel. And then I'm just going to, where the colors meet, I'm just going to brush back and forth. And I get a really nice blend. I went out of the lines a little bit. So if you go out of the lines before it dries, what you want to do is just scrub at it with your water and just blot it. You have a little undo button. Of course, you could take some white and you could cover over a mistake, but it's a little bit better if you blot it off, because sometimes if you use a white paint, it doesn't exactly match your white paper. It's kind of crazy, but that's how it goes. Now let's do a blue. I'm going to start off with my pastel blue here. The key when you're trying to match the darker color to your pastels is to look for the undertone. So this blue has a little bit more of a green undertone to it. So when I look at my Inktense, I'm going to try to find something that's got a little bit more of a green. That blue right there has a little more green than that blue. That blue there has quite a bit more green in it. I think that one's probably a better match, so I'm going to use that. And that's why it's important to swatch on paper and not trust the pre-printed swatch, because a pre-printed swatch is never going to be as accurate as using the actual product, because they didn't swatch that with the product. They swatched that with a commercial printer. So you want to do that little bit of work. And the nice thing about swatching, even though it might seem a little tedious, is that it gets you using your product, because sometimes you get something new and then you're like, well, I don't know what to do, and it becomes precious and then you don't end up using it. So I'm going to clean my brush, blot off the extra water, and just go back and forth on the seam of those two colors, and look, we get a really pretty blend. Now, the reason why this works better, or a little bit easier to blend rather than just taking that darker color and fading it out, is because of the body of the pastel color. So you can take any of those Inktense colors and add water to them and make a pastel shade and make it lighter. And that's fine, totally, absolutely do that. But having the pastels, it is a little bit easier because the viscosity of the paint makes it not so runny, and then it's just a little easier to control. But of course, if you wanted to paint on fabric and you wanted a pastel color, the pastel paints would lift a little bit. You definitely would want to stick with just the Inktense. So here I have kind of a, I would say a mid warmth yellow. It's not lemony, but it's also not too orangey. So I'm just going to go with this sun yellow. This one won't be as easy to see the blend just because yellow is such a light value color. Again, clean the brush, blot it off, paint over the seam, and you got some nice blends there. Now, this is such a fun technique. You could just draw some just some fun shapes and kind of think of like paint splots. And then we can do some more blending, because I think it's just kind of a fun technique to do and to learn. And plus, we're filling up the space. So you get the major elements in first, the 3 crayons, and then you can fill in with more small whimsical design shapes. And it gives you a chance to practice these other colors. Now, I don't like to mix pastels and metallics because you don't get the contrast. For one, your metallics often are pretty light in value. Because of the mica in them, they don't get really dark. So you're not going to get a lot of contrast that way. And your pastels are already really light in value. So when you mix them together, it doesn't really do anything for either of them. So I would say they're great to add to your basic products, but it's kind of like adding too many spices to the dish when you mix them together. I'm going to add a little more of that pastel onto that purple. And you can let these paint splots just kind of be a little more varied, because light would be hitting them from different directions, and just really have fun with them. Because this lesson today is just about getting familiar with your products and playing and having a nice time. Let's see, we'll do a little bit of that. that color. Oh, and I want to revisit our leaves and see what sort of accents we want to add to that. So actually, I think that would probably be good to skip ahead to in just a minute here. But you can have fun finishing your art supply card here and practice mixing your pastels with your regular colors and, you know, kind of learn the blending. And a lot of art practices is just getting used to the materials that you have. All right. This is almost dry. I'm going to blot off any big puddles. And then I think I'm just going to give it a quick little blast with my heat tool to finish drying it. Because this was our printmaking one. This isn't one where we're looking for any granulation. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and let me know while I dry this. So what I want to do on this one is actually go over top with some line work, just with a black pen. We have so much detail at our fingertips here from our printmaking, so that can really help us sketch in those details and give us a little bit more refinement. It's going to kind of be like a line and wash, but because we use metallics and the Inktense, if we did our line work first, then we cover over a lot of that. Now, when you're going to use a fine liner, you really want to make sure your paper is completely dry. Otherwise, you'll ruin your fine liners. I think this actually looks really pretty as is. I'll hold it up to the front camera so you can see, but you don't have to do anything else to this if you don't want to. I'm giving you some ideas just to help in case, you know, you want to try something different. Okay, go back to the other camera. And I'm going to grab a pen. And the wonderful thing about this actually is that you don't have to have a permanent pen. If you're thinking, oh, I want to do that pen and ink technique, that line and wash, but all I have is a gel pen, or all I have is this pen in my office supply drawer, you don't have to worry. Now, this is a Derwent line maker. These pens are waterproof, so I could have used the pen first and sketched it out, and then added watercolor or added Inktense. But this is even better because I can go over this if I want to, but I have all these lovely details, so I don't even have to worry about it. I'm starting by just going around the edge. And you can look at the leaf too. I'm just going by what I have here on my print. You could also use a colored pen, like a fine liner, fine tip pen that was like red or green, if you prefer that. Now I'm going to have this one underlapping, so I'm going to stop when I get to that edge of this leaf. If you have an area that's kind of didn't print very well, you could turn that into a hole in the leaf if you wanted to. Like, I think I'll make that just kind of like a broken part of the leaf, like maybe a caterpillar got to it or something.
Lindsay, I believe that that's a Derwent line maker, but I just wanted to check. We had a question about that.
Yes, it is. It's a 0.5 black Derwent line maker. Awesome. And I believe they're available in packs of
they come in packs of 5, I believe.
5, okay. Now, do you guys have them open stock in your store?
We do not. No, they come in those packs, those little cardstock packs.
Okay.
And then Another question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Depending on the strength of the breeze of the dryer. Oh, wait, actually, that's not a question. It's not really a question, actually. I read it wrong.
Oh, okay. Oh, did somebody have a handy tip to share?
I think so. There's been a lot tonight. Depending on the strength of the breeze of the dryer, it will move the paint to which will change the texture of it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I like to use and these are now, I think you sell these at Michael's too, but they're now black. They're not white anymore, but it's the Ranger Heated Craft Tool, and it doesn't make a lot of air. It's only heat. And it's not super hot. You can, like, if you're a rubber stamper and you like to do embossing, you can emboss with it. It's not my favorite embossing gun, but it will do the trick. But it's not as hot and as scary as, you know, the Milwaukees and some of the more heavy duty heat gun. So I love it for drying my watercolor paper, and it's pretty quiet too. So, but it's if you go to buy one now, they're no longer white, they're black, which is kind of nice because then it doesn't look as much like a hair dryer. You don't want to dry your hair with that because it is way too hot for that. Now here, when I go around, I'm going to go behind, or I'm going to go in front of rather, the other leaf. And honestly, these little card ideas, you could do as much or as little to them as you want. You can make them a nice, just chill out and relax type of craft, or you could get really artsy with them. You can add some more metallics on them. You can add a lot of details or keep it simple. Yeah, the secondary little veins. I think these would be so pretty on fabric with the Inktense, because then you could actually sew with it. It would be really pretty if you like to decorate like your bedroom for different seasons. You could do this on a pillowcase, like do like a little border on the side of your pillowcase with them. I think it would be so pretty. Now I do want to add a little bit of a shadow on that leaf just because I have that one overlapping, and I'm just going to take a little bit of my cherry red, and I'm going to mix a little bit of green into that just to tone it down and make it a little bit kind of brownish, because green and red are opposites. So they'll make brown, and just kind of going to add a little bit right there with my brush. And then I'm going to just wash it, blot it on paper towel so it's just slightly damp, and then I can drag it out. And because it's Inktense underneath, I mean, there's some metallic too, but because of the Inktense, it's not going to reactivate anything. Now, if you want, you could even put a shadow underneath that. And because we have Inktense, it shouldn't bother what we have underneath there. So if I'm going to do a shadow, I can either mix up a color for a shadow, or I could use this kind of like Payne's gray color. I think I'll just use that because we're almost out of time. So I'm just going to move this out of the way. And so when I do a shadow, I do like to have something to look at. So I'm just going to mix up a little puddle of that and clean my brush off. And then I would take a leaf. I'm going to use a different leaf just because the other one's all painty, and just grab a piece of paper. So I would just lay that down there, and I would say, okay, how are my lights making the shadow? And I would paint it. You could do this either way, but I like to kind of paint it with water. And you can see I'm not disturbing the paint underneath. Give it like, I'm going to give this paint a place to go. And then I pick up my color and I just drop it into where I've already put the color. Now, if it's a little space like that, then I'll just go and paint it in, because that's really too small to wet it and then add the color. Or if I just need like a little sliver, I might just go in and do that. But this way I get a really natural looking soft shadow. And it just elevates this simple little design a little bit more. And if I get too much water, which sometimes happens when I do this, I'll just blot my brush on my paper towel. Now, if I want a stronger color, I'll pick up the color right from the pan and just add it where it touches the leaf. Let's see, did I have I know I had a little bit somewhere else here. And if you have too much, clean your brush, blot it on a rag, and you can go in and set your dry brush anywhere and just sop up any excess color that you don't want. And you can drag it out a little bit, like I'm thinking I need a little bit more dragged around there. And then I would move my leaf just a little bit so it's going the same direction as the other one to give me a good idea of where those need to be. And I would just say, okay, I've got kind of shadow along there, so I'll just do a little bit of water. And I got a little bit up here, so I'll do a little water up there. I'll go back in with my color and add it right up close to the leaf. And just kind of let it fade out onto the area where I put it, where I put the water. The stem, I could just draw the stem in. Oh, I forgot to finish that stem. It didn't flow the whole way. But just like with anything, you can stop at any point you're happy with it, or you can keep going if you have more detail you want to put in. And if you just have a little sliver of shadow you want, you can just go in and paint that in with a really light mix. I'm going to lift off a little bit of that because it does look a little strong. You don't get a lot of shift with the Inktense from wet to dry. So if it looks really too dark at this stage, I would just go and lift some of that off with a dry brush because it's not going to shift as much as watercolor. In my experience, that's what I found. But I think this is such a sweet little card, and it really didn't take all that much work. So the next time you just want to try out your supplies and you don't really know what you want to do with them, try these techniques. I know they're not earth-shattering, and you're probably thinking, Lindsay, I could have thought of that. And I'm sure you could have, but sometimes you just need a little reminder of fun things that you can do with what you already have. You can go in the yard, you can pick up some leaves and do some nature printing and share this project with your friends and family. It's not intimidating, and it's something that we all can do, and it's a great way to test out your supplies. So I'm going to show you this one with the front camera all finished. Hopefully that front camera picks it up a little bit better. I think it has a really fun, almost illustrative look to it. And then this one I think is my favorite. You could also do a shadow just like I showed you with the printed ones. Again, just put your leaf on a piece of white paper, see where the shadow falls, and let that be your guide. Yeah, and just have fun, experiment and play, because anytime you're getting used to those new materials, that's perfect time. It's perfect time to just have some play and don't get too precious about it, and just have a good time. So did we have any more questions before we sign off tonight?
We do not, but a bunch of thanks to you in the chat, and they really enjoyed the class.
I'm so glad. Well, thank you so much for bearing with us tonight. I do appreciate it. If you'd like to share your artwork, please tag it with the hashtag Make It With Michaels and Michaels Classes. And you can also tag Derwent. Their website, their Instagram is Derwent Art US _US. Is that right? Did I get that right, Gianna? Derwent _art, I think. If you type Derwent in on Instagram, it will pop up, and you can tag Michael Stores as well. And I would love to see what you're working on. On behalf of Gianna and Hinema, I'm Lindsay Wyrick. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.